All right, everybody, we are live. Welcome, everybody, to Standing for Truth. I am your host, Donnie.
And I'm your co-host, Matt. So, everyone, we're going to have a good time today. On Standing for Truth here, we like to focus on biblical creation. We host debates, interviews, discussions, and a lot more. But make sure to check out our website. It's fairly new. You can find it down in the description box. It's standingfortruthministries.com. And we have endless content there, and you can find everything pretty easily. So if you enjoy this type of content, make sure to check out the website. Make sure to hit like and subscribe. And from there, you can find pretty much everything you're looking for. We've been doing this for now about 3 years. And we've tried to cover a little bit of everything. And we've had Kent on the show now multiple times. So it's great to have him here.
And I think 30 times.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, yeah, we've had him on about 25 to 30 times, Dr. Hovind. So tonight we have the epic debate. I apologize for my voice, been fighting a bit of a cold this last week. We got Matt here to help me out with the debate, so I appreciate that. This is the epic debate, though, between Dr. Hovind and CJ Cox. Both very seasoned debaters, and they will be debating end times theology. Does the Bible teach a pre-tribulation rapture or a post-tribulation rapture?
So let's break the ice then and get to know who the debaters are a little bit. CJ and Kent, I want to thank you both for being here and giving us your time for tonight's debate. Kent, let's start with you. How have you been, and what's new?
Well, let's see. How have I been? I'm overworked, underpaid, way behind, dead, tired, totally broke, but I never complain. So that's nothing's changed there. God is good. Some of his kids drive me nuts, but God is good. We're building Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama. People visiting from all over the world. I've had 190 baptized here now. So we're really having a good time teaching creation using science as a way to do it. So we're having a wonderful time. Come on down, visit. It's all free.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Kent, it looks like suddenly on your screen, all we see is your slide. And then we no longer
why do we just see the slide? My tech guys are working on it now.
No worries. No rush. I'm sure
you're hearing the audio, but not. There we go. Okay.
And CJ.
Yeah. Anyway, go ahead, CJ.
A little bit about yourself. How you been, CJ?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. I've been doing well. Been having a pretty interesting day today so far. I actually started off the morning with my political podcast and then went on to doing a podcast responding to Randall Rouser on a little video he made after our debate, which is nice. We're going to continue to do that. I think something just fell behind you, brother. Anyways, so that was cool. And then now obviously having a debate here. So pretty busy day so far, but everything's been good. God is good. I obviously have the great pleasure of being in a society where I can actually do those sorts of things and have the luxury of being busy. So I'm definitely not going to complain for anything like that. God is good. But real quick, I do want to say, if anybody's interested, got some very interesting videos on my channel that I think you guys should check out. A response to Randall Rouser on how a literalist could interpret Exodus 32. That was today. I just did a video yesterday on why the conquest of Canaan can't be hyperbolic. And also, we did a response to Useful Charts Did Moses Exist video about a week ago. If you guys are interested in any of those, definitely do check them out. And that's everything that's been going on at my channel.
Awesome. I appreciate it, CJ. Matt, I think you're going to go through the format for tonight real quick.
Yeah, let's do that real quick. Tonight's debate will be a formal debate with 12-minute opening statements. CJ is going to start, followed by 6 to 8 minutes uninterrupted rebuttals, and then a 30-minute discussion period with 5-minute closing statements from each person. And then we'll be having an audience Q&A. So make sure to gather your questions, formulate what you want to have, write it down, and then either tag myself as @YoungEarthCreation or Standing for Truth himself, and we'll gather up your questions for the end. All right.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Matt, CJ, we're going to be handing it over to you, my good man, for your opening statement. You have 12 minutes whenever you're ready.
Absolutely. Thank you. So, just want to say, of course, shalom all and blessings to you all in the name of the in the matchless name, can't even speak, of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, to whom be all the glory. I want to quickly thank, of course, SFT for setting up and hosting this debate. as well as Dr. Dino for participating in the debate with me. And I'd also like to thank the audience for their participation in listening here today. And I would also like to pray not only that they pray for themselves in receiving revelation from the Lord and understanding of what God exactly is trying to get to them today, but also be praying for me and Dr. Dino that we also be speaking in such a way that God is glorified, debating in such a way that God is glorified, and that we and you guys are all edified in his name. Our conversation tonight will be focusing on whether or not the rapture is taught to be before or after the Great Tribulation period at the end. And I am to defend the position that it will be happening before the Great Tribulation period and not after. I promise I know how to English correctly. So there's a couple things that lead me to believe that the tribulation period comes after the rapture. And I want to go ahead and jump right into what some of the arguments are. The very first thing I want to say, because it's the quickest one, is that a post-tribulation rapture does kind of render the rapture a little bit useless. If all the rapture is the saints who survived till the end times making it to heaven, then it's no different than there just being an end times and having saved people in it. In other words, the rapture is not an event so much as it is just simply the time when we end the world. Now, it is important to note at this point that Dr. Hovind would take a position that is post-trib, but pre-wrath, which is, I think, not 100% unique to him, don't get me wrong, but certainly a unique position that I'll have to address separate from some of the arguments that I would typically have against a post-tribber. But nonetheless, I do think you effectively do either have to create a distinction that does not exist, which I believe we'll get into that in talking about the Great Tribulation period versus the final wrath of God. Or you have to, and this is what I have, in my experience, seen most post-tribs do, effectively render the rapture completely useless. But that, of course, is the small argument that's quickly laid out. So the second argument I want to lay out, which I think has a lot more substance for us to talk about, is the argument from typology. Now, we know that typology is an accurate and good way to study and exegete the scriptures. We know this explicitly from not only Jesus saying he taught only through parables in John 1:18, telling us that Jesus is the person in the beginning who was teaching all of the prophets, right? No man has ever seen the Father. The only person who has seen God would be this, no man has seen the Father. The Son is the one who has exegeted him. And I'm paraphrasing that terribly, but you guys get the idea. Basically, you don't actually ever see the Father at any time. You only see the Son. And if the Son does not change at any point in time, right? Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever, then we can assume that his teaching in the past through the Old Testament was the same as his teaching in the current, namely in a parabolic fashion. The Bible says that Jesus only taught through parables. So what does that mean? That means the Old Testament is effectively a giant parable for us. It doesn't mean that the stories aren't true. They are true. That's the difference with God's parables versus our fictional stories, is ours are fictional. However, we can assume that we can actually take this in a parabolic sense. And of course, the book of Hebrews outright teaches that for us and goes through the different typologies shown in the Levitical priesthood, temple sacrifices, and so on and so forth. So we know that typology is a legitimate way to look at the scripture. Let's go ahead and see what typology has to tell us in regards to this issue. The first time we're ever going to see any typology of the rapture is, I think most people would agree, Genesis 5, verses 21 to 24, when talking about Enoch. And it says, and Enoch lived 60 and 5 years and begat Methuselah. And Enoch walked with God after he begat Methuselah 300 years and begat sons and daughters. And all the days of Enoch were 360 and 5 years. And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him. Here we see, sorry, there's a bug there on my screen. Here we see a person not dying, but rather being translated, is the actual translation that you would use if you were going like with a literal translation of the Hebrew. Obviously, the meaning is still the same. I'm not saying that you need to, retreat to the Hebrew. The point just being, it literally is communicating that he is translated into heaven the self-same way that you would be translating a word from one language into another. It's actually a very interesting word to use. And of course, the English does perfectly fine by saying he was not, for God took him. Now, we notice here that there is a great tribulation period coming later on in Genesis. There's also a great judgment coming after that tribulation. You notice I said after that tribulation. Why? Well, because it's in Genesis 6 that we hear of all the terrible and debaucherous things that man was doing with, in regards to had the giants in those days and the men of renown and the daughters of men going into, or excuse me, daughters of men having sexual relations with the sons of God and so on and so forth, right? And that is clearly a period of great tumult, great tribulation, you could say, on the earth. And after that period, you see a flood of waters or a judgment come, right? Notice Enoch is taken before either of those things actually happens. In fact, if you were to look at a chronology, which I know that everybody here is very familiar with since we all are younger creationists, you will notice that Enoch actually is taken almost 1,000 years before this particular event happened. And even Enoch's son, Methuselah, dies before the actual judgment takes place, right? So here we see clear typology of a believer being raptured, literally translated out of death before any of the tumult happens, as well as even a second typology here of another believer being gone off of the earth before there is actually the flood waters coming in. The second place where we see clear typology of the rapture, I think, would be in Genesis. I believe it is chapter 19, if I'm not mistaken. I have it pulled up here somewhere. There it is. Yes, chapter 19, where we see the destruction of the city of Sodom and Gomorrah. And the angels, of course, go into the city to retrieve Lot. And they say some very interesting things, I think, that are very relevant to our conversation here today. Starting at verse 1, and there came two angels to Sodom and even, and Lot sat in the gates of Sodom, and Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them, and he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. He said, Behold, now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry all night, and wash your feet, and ye shall rise up early and go on your ways. And they said, Nay, but we will abide in the street all night. He pressed upon them greatly, and they turned in unto him, and entered into his house. And he made them a feast, and did break unleavened bread, and they did eat. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round about, both young and old, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, Where are the men which came into thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after him, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. Behold, now I have two daughters, which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye unto them as is good in your eyes. It's interesting to see even how fallen Lot's own state is in this particular society, but let's continue. Only unto these men do nothing, for therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. And they said, Stand back. And they said again, The one fellow came in to sojourn, and he will needs be a judge. Now we will deal worse with thee than with them. And they pressed sore upon the man, even Lot, and came near to break the door. But the man put forth their hand and pulled Lot into the house to them, and shut to the door. And they smote the men that were at the door of the house with blindness, both small and great, so that they wearied themselves to find the door. So the men of Lot said unto Lot, said unto Lot, Hast thou any besides son-in-law and thy son and thy daughters, and whatsoever thou hast in the city? Bring them out of this place. For we will destroy this place, because the cry of them is waxen great before the face of the earth, and the Lord hath sent us to destroy it. And Lot went out and spake unto his sons-in-law, which married his daughters and sons, and said, Up, get you out of the place, for the Lord will destroy this city. But he seemed as one that mocked to his sons. So we notice here that they are saying, hey, we need to get you out of this city, and then we will have the calamity befalling the city. Then we will destroy it. We have come here to destroy it, but we can't do so, Lot, until we pull you out of this city, right? We can continue on, but of course we're limited on time, so I don't just want to dedicate the entire portion here just to talking about this. It's too many different scriptures for us to read because it's between verses 37 and 45, but we see another clear typology in the story of Joseph. Now, it is virtually unanimously agreed in the Christian church that Joseph is a clear type of Christ. He is a Jew who is betrayed by his 12 brothers, who just so happen to be the patriarchs of the 12 tribes. When he is betrayed, he is dead, right? At least as far as his father is concerned. Goes on to a Gentile empire, namely the empire of Egypt, where he becomes the right-hand man, sitting at the right hand of the father, right, of the Pharaoh, marries a Gentile bride, and then eventually, during the time of tribulation, saves the 12 tribes of Israel, namely his 12 brothers, from said tribulation. But what do we notice about that story? He's saving the 12 tribes of Israel, right, from the famine that has come to the land. The Egyptian people, thank you very much. The Egyptian people, of course, are already safe in Egypt. And on top of that, if you want to talk about